Welcome to this episode of Conversations on Groong. Today we're diving into a turning point in modern history, Ukraine's 2014 Euromaidan. This is a must-listen if you want to understand how these events shaped Ukraine's trajectory, leading into the devastating war that is now raged for nearly 3 years and has taken an untold amount of lives. Mainstream media barely scratches the surface of these events, leaving much of the truth untold, if not distorted. Our guest, Professor Ivan Katchanovski from the University of Ottawa, has dedicated years to uncovering the realities behind the Euromaidan. One of his earlier books was censored for challenging the conventional narratives. And today we'll discuss his latest book on the Euromaidan, explore its insights, and go beyond Ukraine, asking for his perspectives on recent events in Georgia and Armenia as well. What really happened in 2014? How can we tolerate so many lives lost? And for what? What lessons can we learn for other nations in these turbulent times? Stay with us to find out. But before we start, a few quick comments. A big thank you to the hundreds of subscribers who joined us in the last few days after our interview with Jeffrey Sachs and then Karen Katowski. Our Groong podcast started as a weekly deep dive into Armenian news with experts in Armenia and the region, and it's called Weekend Review. This format, which is Conversations on Groong, features a wider variety of experts and not necessarily directly related to Armenia, but relevant to Armenia as well. And we're looking forward to featuring more international guests on our show, so welcome to the journey. Second, if you love in-depth coverage of Armenia and the South Caucasus and beyond, if you love the show, then why not subscribe? Hit the subscribe button, please. And if you're watching this on YouTube, then leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Help expand the conversation and give us ideas on what we can do to improve this. And lastly, if you're enjoying the show, then please consider supporting us. You can go to podcasts.groong.org/donate to learn more. Ospet and I take nothing from these donations, and they are used to streamline our publishing process, to expand our reach, to be able to deliver shows to you like this in a more speedy manner and focus our time on producing more content. So thank you in advance, and let's go to the show.
Professor Ivan Katchanovski, welcome to the show.
Thank you for the invitation. It is a pleasure to join your show.
Professor, since this is your first time on our podcast, can you summarize for our listeners your research interests and your past academic work?
I specialize in politics and conflicts in Ukraine and other post-Soviet countries, in addition to also studying comparative politics in the United States and foreign policy of the US and other Western countries towards Ukraine and other post-Soviet countries. And I did my dissertation on this topic of regional political divisions and conflicts, separatist conflicts in Ukraine and Moldova in 2001 at George Mason University in the United States. And I'm originally from Ukraine, from Western Ukraine, and I got my PhD in the United States. And since then, I was doing research and having a variety of research and teaching positions at various universities, and also including Harvard University, the University of Toronto, State University of Potsdam, and also at the Kluge Center at the Library of Congress. And now I am a professor at the School of Political Studies at the University of Ottawa. So I specialize in researching conflicts and politics of Ukraine for a very long time before this became kind of a very hot topic and issue, which is still a very important conflict, which is still ongoing.
Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Welcome. Professor, you recently published a book about the Maidan Massacre, and we'll definitely be talking about that later in the show. But I wanted to first focus on what's happening on the ground in Ukraine today. The war is raging now for almost 3 years. The advance of Russian forces is now accelerating, and it's most Western analysts now also admit that the situation is going dire for the Ukrainian armed forces, and they're essentially advancing tens of kilometers per day. So let's begin with this topic. You have been assembling a count of casualties from the war, and we saw a recent tweet from you on X or Twitter about this. Can you tell us, in your estimation, what the latest casualty figures are? What is the human cost of this conflict so far?
This is very terrible cost to Ukraine, and based on my estimates on my research and on reliable sources, which include admissions of different parties of this conflict against their interest, not what they claim about casualties of adversaries, but what actually they reveal about their own casualties, which is very important because in any war, there is a propaganda, there is disinformation, and often casualties are inflated of adversaries and their own casualties are not admitted. So based on such sources, I can say that my current estimate of number of killed military casualties, number of Ukrainian forces members who were killed, and this includes not only Ukrainian military armed forces, but also includes state security service, police, National Guard, border guards, and other armed formations and law enforcement agencies. So according to this estimate, the number of killed is now about 140,000 of Ukrainian forces members, and based on typical ratio of killed to wounded of 1 to 4, the number of wounded would be approximately 4 times higher. So this is 560,000 wounded according to this estimate. And this estimate is based on a recent evaluation from which was published by Ukrainian journalist Yuri Butusov, who is actually a very he's an anti-Russian journalist, and he is also actively involved in this war, covering this war and reporting about this war. So he basically stated, and he has a connection to the Ukrainian government. So basically he stated that recently there was a report from the armed forces of Ukraine to General Staff of Ukraine that a number of killed of members of Ukrainian armed forces was 70,000, and plus 35,000 members of Ukrainian armed forces were missing. And so I added approximate number of other units which I mentioned. So this is a current estimate of Ukrainian casualties. A number of Russian casualties are based on identification by name of specific members of Russian forces who were killed. Again, this includes not only military, but also Wagner and other formations which took part in the invasion of Ukraine and in this war. So such casualties are estimated by BBC at around now 181,000 killed. So I can say if we add some missing in action and also a few again people who might not have been accounted, whose names were not yet published. So I can say that at least now 85,000 of members of Russian forces were killed in this conflict, in the war with Ukraine, and 4 times as high a number were wounded. But in addition to this, there is also participation of Donbas separatist forces. So again, which is often totally ignored and not reported by the media, and even official estimates, they just talk about war with Russia. But there is still ongoing conflict, civil war, in addition to war with Russia in Ukraine. And in this case, Donbas separatist forces casualties, according to reports by BBC, which relied on number of obituaries and number of people who were missing among Donbas separatist members, would be now estimated at around 25,000 killed, and 4 times higher number of wounded, which would be 100,000. So this is the estimate of military casualties or casualties of killed in action or wounded in action. But estimate of number of civilians who were killed in this war is based on United Nations reports, which document casualties by name, again by specific location and other information. So according to this estimate, I think now around 12,000 people were killed in entire Ukraine, and most of them, I think around 80% of them were killed in Ukrainian government-controlled areas, and about 20% of them were killed in Russian-occupied and Donbas separatist-controlled areas of Ukraine. So if we can add some other casualties, in particular in Mariupol, based on Human Rights Human Rights Watch report and United Nations report and other sources of evidence. There were might have been in other locations in Donbass, so at least a few other thousand casualties among civilians were not reported. So my current estimate that there is approximately now about 16,000 civilians were killed in this war in Ukraine.
Those are staggering numbers, no matter what way you look at it. Although we have heard of much higher numbers, but I assume that you put less credence on that. Do you believe this is a good confidence margin in these numbers?
Yes, I think this is based on my research, and I specialize in conflict studies. Not only and I teach about different conflicts, different wars, and people who give estimates, again, very high estimates. This is not very credible, and a not valid estimate because they do not mention what kind of sources they have. So I give specific sources of my estimates. So this is like official Ukrainian basic data, which were reported by journalists. Also, BBC estimates, BBC identification by name, which is again supported by other evidence. And in addition to this, even if people say that there were like few 100,000 Ukrainian forces members or Russian forces members killed in Ukraine, this makes it physically impossible to happen because this would imply that based on a typical wounded to killed ratio of 4:1, this would imply that all basically members of Ukrainian and Russian forces were casualties of this conflict. So nobody basically would be left because of this. So it's not possible physically to have such very high casualties. And this is not a World War II type of conflict. And the same applies to civilian casualties. Again, civilian casualties, in terms of civilian casualties, this war is actually one of the lowest in terms of ratio of civilians killed to military or to members of armed formations who are killed in the war.
Professor, the parties were very close to signing a ceasefire way back in March of 2022, less than 2 weeks into the war. Yet, it is common knowledge that Boris Johnson personally intervened and urged Zelensky not to agree to the ceasefire. What was on the table in Istanbul in March 2022, and why did Zelensky withdraw from that agreement? And also, was that a rational choice?
I think this is, a very interesting story because now this this is very widely known by many people that there was a peace deal which was close to being negotiated or being finalized in Istanbul between Ukraine and Russia to end this war in the spring of 2022, and that basically Boris Johnson intervened to stop this peace deal from being finalized. But actually, I was the one who reported this first on Twitter, and when it was published by Ukrainian media in Ukrainian language first, and this became viral story. And afterward, it was confirmed by head of Ukrainian delegations and peace talks. It was confirmed by former Israeli Prime Minister, by other officials, including members of Ukrainian delegation in Istanbul, and was confirmed also by former Chancellor of Germany. And even recently, Victoria Nuland confirms that basically United States and United Kingdom intervened to stop this peace deal from being finalized. And in terms of this peace deal, which was, again, it's now publicly confirmed, and the draft of this peace deal was published recently by New York Times. Again, this was denied by most of the media, and most of, again, I think with just few exceptions, mainstream media in the West never reported about this peace deal until very recently, with a mention by New York Times, and in almost this just maybe one or few exceptions, they still did not report that Boris Johnson and United States, basically Biden administration, intervened to stop this peace deal. Even so, number of sources confirming this is overwhelming, and all of them were present in this peace talks or have knowledge of first-hand knowledge of such peace talks. So in terms of these negotiations, there was a kind of peace deal draft which was very close to being finalized, in which Ukraine agreed to be a neutral country and not to join NATO, and to reduce size of the armed forces, which was still to be negotiated exact number. And in return, in exchange for this, again, Russia agreed to to withdraw their forces from occupied territory of Ukraine, with the exception of Donbass and Crimea, which was annexed in 2014, and Donbass, which was, again, at the time controlled by separatists, but was recognized by Russia as a kind of as a part of self-proclaimed DNR and LNR, separatist republics. So the status of Donbass and Crimea would have to be decided in a meeting between Putin and Zelensky, which was then to be decided again, kind of according to information, it would be held within a few weeks after this draft was initialed by Ukrainian delegation at the very end of March. And then and there was also issue of guarantees from Western countries and other countries in terms of implementation of this deal. So this is kind of I think this was very important kind of deal, peace deal, and possibility to end this war very early. But because of intervention from the West, basically this led to continuation of the war in Ukraine, which now became not only war between Russia and Ukraine, but also proxy war between the West and Russia in Ukraine.
Professor Katchanovski, given this compounding loss of lives and territory, with the trajectory of the war right now, why is Zelensky continuing the war?
I think he does this because this is a proxy war, as I mentioned, because Boris Johnson told basically Zelensky to continue this war. And this was not just initiative of British Prime Minister, his personal decision. This was a decision by, he said this was collective West. It was reported by Ukrainska Pravda newspaper, which is a pro-Zelensky government and was one of the main tools of Ukrainian government propaganda during this war. But they reported this in May of 2022, that this was initiative of Boris Johnson, and he delivered message to Zelensky on behalf of collective West, that even if Zelensky would sign such agreement with Russia, Western countries would not provide guarantees to Ukraine to implement this deal, peace deal. So, and this was confirmed by other sources afterwards. So in this case, I think Zelensky basically followed what he was told by the West to continue the war, because the goal of the West in this war is not to defeat Russia, which would be a very difficult task to do, but their goal is to weaken Russia. It was an official statement of head of Pentagon in spring of 2022 also. So they basically used Ukraine to fight Russia again, and to avoid casualties among Western countries, among NATO countries. And Zelensky acts basically in the interest not of Ukraine, but he acts in the interest of the West, because according to, again, my research and a lot of evidence, Ukraine is actually a client state of the United States, and the United States and other Western countries use Ukraine as a proxy.
But I mean, for him personally, can you tell us a little bit more? What are his personal motivations? Is it money? Is it security? How can he justify? I mean, we've seen examples like this even in Armenia, I would say, many would argue, but it just fascinates me that an elected official can fully support something that is against the interests of his country at the cost of so many lives and so much territory. He must have some pretty strong motivations to do that. What are those motivations?
This is also a very important issue, because Zelensky came to power. He won presidential elections in 2018 on a peace platform. So he promised that he would end the war in Donbass and would do everything which would be necessary to do this, even travel there. And at the start of his presidency, there were some efforts to do this. He met with Putin in Paris, and there were discussions and negotiations how to end the war and implement Minsk agreements, which were signed under Poroshenko. But then Zelensky made a U-turn, basically. And this happened after election of Biden as a US president. And then Zelensky started to kind of basically his policy became a policy of Poroshenko, who was during his presidency basically very nationalistic and using slogans of army, face and language. And Zelensky was running against Poroshenko and against his platform, election platform of Poroshenko, and was regarded as peace candidate. But when Zelensky actually, after election of Biden as a U.S. president, Zelensky basically became what I call Poroshenko on steroids. So he became even more extreme and more kind of radical in promoting military, kind of saying that Ukraine would return not only Donbass but Crimea by military force, and that tried to ban he banned Russian parties in Ukraine, and also started to pursue kind of a policy against Orthodox Church, which was linked to Russia, and also promoting Ukrainian language. And so, one motivation for this would be actually that this was a pressure from the United States, specifically Biden administration, because this coincided with election of Biden to presidency of the United States. Another reason for this was pressure from far right.
Sorry, did you say far right?
Yes, exactly. Even open neo-Nazis like Azov battalion, which now became a brigade, and not only one, but I think 2 brigades and other formations. So basically, Zelensky went to front line as a part of his promise to, again, during a meeting between during meeting in Paris with Putin, and negotiations also which involved German and French leaders. And so he basically agreed, Zelensky agreed, and Putin agreed to basically withdraw forces from separatist separatist forces and Ukrainian forces from the line of basically line of contact or front line. To prevent escalation of this conflict and so on, and but far-right formations refused to do this. So Zelensky had to go personally to Donbass, to frontline area, and try to plead personally to members of Azov, a neo-Nazi-led Azov formation, for them to withdraw forces. But he was humiliated, openly humiliated by Azov veterans, who said that they would not agree to do this and so on, and they assaulted him and called him a variety of names. And afterwards, there was attack by far-right, including open neo-Nazis, on his presidential administration. So basically, Zelensky was afraid that he would be he would face very powerful far-right, including open neo-Nazis in Ukraine, if he would make any peace deal with Russia to end this war. And so this is another factor why he pursues this policy, and now chooses basically become a president of war and continue this war, which has without any real possibility of defeating Russia, because I think this is a decision which has tremendous negative consequences, because he was a much better option. And I think final issue is that he's by occupation he is a comedian. So he likes to have a kind of a public ovation, basically. So he likes to have applause all the time and perform to public. So this is like his basically his kind of mission and his experience. So as a president, he became very involved in public relations, image of himself. And so for him, it was very important to get this kind of public expression of public support and public adoration from the Western countries, and especially kind of by the parliaments, by governments, by foreign officials who would visit, who would meet with Zelensky and would praise him publicly, would give a lot of other kind of signs of support. So so he continues basically doing this because he received such public public ovations and public support from for doing this war. Even so, this is contrary to Ukrainian interests, and many Ukrainians lose their life.
Yeah, what a dark comedy indeed. It is turning out. But another question, because we need to move on, Professor. But I do want to ask, because I spent many childhood summers in Donetsk, and I recall it as an especially tranquil place. I loved visiting my family there. And you have been a critic of the official mainline propaganda of Ukraine. So I wanted to ask, how has this conflict affected you personally, and are you able to visit currently Ukraine, despite your criticism of Zelensky's policies?
I think there are two reasons why I cannot now go to Ukraine. One reason is that Zelensky now adopted a policy that Ukrainian citizens, no matter if they have foreign citizenship of other countries, would not be permitted to leave Ukraine if they are males from 18 years of age until 60 years of age. So even so, I live in Canada and I'm Canadian citizen. I'm also Ukrainian citizen. So if I would go to Ukraine, I would not be able to leave Ukraine because I would be regarded as as a person who can be mobilized. And there is even a possibility that they can mobilize me to fight in this war, which is just unbelievable because I live in the United States and in Canada since 1994. But it's not possible, and the same applies to many other Ukrainian men. Another issue is that my house and all my property in Ukraine, in Western Ukraine, in Lutsk, near Lutsk, city of Lutsk, which is located near Poland, was taken by force, basically by fraud, based on fraudulent court decisions in 2014 and 2015 as a retaliation for my studies of Maidan Massacre. So this was done with involvement of government officials who openly intervened in this, and courts issued such decision, basically taking away all my property and land and and my house, which which was owned by my mother and grandmother, and in which I lived for a very long time before, I moved to study in Kyiv and then in the United States. So in this case, I cannot even go to my own house because this is now nobody lives there and it became destroyed. So I cannot even access my own house. And this is retaliation for my own research.
Well, Professor, you mentioned that Zelensky came to power on a platform of peace in 2018, promising to finish the war in Donbass. We have sort of the same thing going on in the US. US President-elect Donald Trump famously pledged to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours after taking over the presidency in January. Yet we're seeing that he's stacking his cabinet with a bunch of neocon appointments. He has appointed Keith Kellogg, an 80-year-old retired general who has backed the peace through strength narrative, and that if Putin doesn't agree with Trump, the US is going to arm Ukraine exponentially more. Still, it is clear that negotiations are actually going on right now. For example, we've read that Zelensky has floated a territory for NATO membership kind of a deal to Russia. Do you think that Trump could seriously actually end this war in 24 hours? And is the prospect for a negotiated peace realistic anytime soon in light of the current developments?
I think there is almost no chance that Trump would be able to end this conflict in 24 hours, as he promised, after his election or after his inauguration. But I think there is a much more significant possibility that this war would end under presidency of Donald Trump compared to the presidency of Biden. Because Biden was using Ukraine again as a proxy, as a tool to fight Russia without losing the lives of American soldiers. And for Trump, Trump was elected on promise of peace in Ukraine. And he also said that even so, he nominated all these people who can express such views. But still, I think he would have very strong presence on this issue, on this matter, because he made this public issue during his election campaign, so he would personally be involved in negotiations. So whatever his people who he appointed say now or said previously, the decision would be basically a decision of Donald Trump. And so I think there is a strong possibility or a real possibility that this war might end, because Ukrainian government is very heavily reliant on the United States, on support, military, financial support. And basically, without U.S. support, Ukrainian government, the Zelensky government, would not be able to continue resisting Russia and would be basically defeat of Ukraine very soon, and not only a complete defeat.
Professor Katchanovski, on that note, we know that the Biden administration is accelerating some of the support for Ukraine, trying to push through as many deals for funding Ukraine. How do you view these recent actions in the last few weeks that they have until Trump comes? Do you believe that this is basically in spite, essentially, as sort of to lock in a negative course for the war? I mean, not a peaceful course, like to lock in the continuation of the war. We also should mention like ATACMS, long-range missiles from other countries. Or do you believe that this may be sort of a way, which I like to believe, just speculation on my part, like coordination between Trump and Biden so that Trump can use that this additional support for Ukraine as a bargaining chip against Russia. What do you think is happening now? Because at least publicly, the United States is increasing their rhetoric against Russia, and it just doesn't make sense. Like they have 4 weeks left for governing the country, and they're doing this.
I think this is just continuation of Biden's strategy to use Ukraine to weaken Russia, and so they basically use the remaining time of Biden presidency to continue this without any real chance of defeating Russia. But basically using Ukraine to fight Russia and to kind of inflict as many kind of casualties in Russia or weaken Russia as much as possible. And using long-range missiles actually would not change this outcome of this war, which is, again, there is no such possibility because Russia still has a very big military advantage over Ukraine. Even if you take missiles, like long-range missiles, Russia has much bigger number and much bigger range and capacity and so on. And it used such missiles for a very long time, but they would not change war outcome by themselves. The same applies to missiles which are provided to Ukraine by United States. And I don't see any evidence that there was any deal between Trump and Biden to basically to coordinate this strategy to kind of I don't see this as kind of as actually confirmed fact. There were some speculation, but I do not see any verification of this. So I cannot say this is what happened.
Right. But Zelensky actually is in Paris today, I think, or yesterday, depending on the time zone, with Trump and the French President Macron. What do you expect from this visit, and what is Zelensky expecting from this visit?
I think he just, again, Zelensky was campaigning during presidential elections in the US. He was campaigning for Biden, basically going to Pennsylvania, and this led to conflict between Zelensky and Trump and Republicans, because even Trump refused to meet Zelensky during his visit in New York in September of this year.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
I'm not sure there was a meeting arranged, but it was very brief and not very cordial. And I think the same happened with this Paris meeting, which was extremely brief. It was just, I think, according to some reports, 20 minutes or maybe half an hour. So and it will involve also a meeting with French president. And this was not, again, any real possibility to discuss any real deals. This was for publicity reasons, and this was arranged by a French president, not by Trump himself. So this was not decision by Trump. And I think I also posted on Twitter today a very important revelation, which was published by Ukrainian media, which is again pro-Zelensky media, because there is no other media in Ukraine which can now allow to report. And this basically media reported that during a visit by a very powerful head of office of Zelensky, called Andriy Yermak, to United States, when he met with kind of with top members of Trump team, including National Security Advisor and Vice President of Trump, and I think maybe even this General Kellogg, who was nominated to be special representative on the war in Ukraine. So he actually during this meeting he was reported to kind of plead United States to support kind of Ukraine fighting Russia and to try to take back all territory which was occupied by Russia since Russian invasion of in February of 2022. And also he was pleading kind of and asking for NATO membership for Ukraine, and Zelensky did this publicly as well. And according to the media reports, again, this was a refusal by Trump, members of Trump team, to offer such support for these proposals by basically a representative of Zelensky. And in terms of NATO membership, even Biden administration refuses to offer any real possibility of NATO membership to Ukraine, and this is not very likely, and this was not even likely before the war. So I don't expect any kind of a real change from this visit by Zelensky to France.
Yeah. So given all of these situations that you were explaining, what would actually constitute some kind of a durable ceasefire or negotiated peace at this point in time?
I think at this time it would involve, I think, two important conditions which need to be satisfied, I think, because Russia kind of demanded now officially they justified the war by NATO membership of Ukraine. So, and this was a key deal, this was key part of Istanbul agreements, which Russia also said basically that they would accept only peace deal which would be similar to Istanbul, but plus territory which is now occupied by Russia and which is also annexed by Russia, which includes not only Donbass, but also includes Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. So I think this would be basically a Russian demand is neutrality of Ukraine, no NATO membership, and all territories of 4 regions of Ukraine, including the territory which is now not occupied by Russia, but was annexed by Russia according to their constitution. So in this case, I think there is possibility only in terms of kind of discussing some kind of a compromise in terms of territory, maybe a current line of control, or I'm sorry, not a current, but the line of control or at the time of ceasefire or peace deal would be accepted as a compromise by Russia, and this possibility of exchanging some territory. But I don't think that Russia would compromise on NATO membership. So NATO membership is not a real possibility. But a peace deal, kind of which would involve such conditions, basically loss of Ukrainian territory on a very significant part of Ukrainian territory, which would there is such possibility for Russia to accept such peace deal. But I'm not sure if Zelensky would be able to accept this, and Trump would be also able to accept this. So this is a still big question.
Let's move on to your book, Professor. In your book, The Maidan Massacre in Ukraine, and it will be linked from our show notes. There's a free version that's electronic, and then you can also buy the hardcover on Amazon. In that book, you dive deep into the Maidan movement, starting in November 2013, and which was sparked, and this is important, by Ukraine's abrupt decision to suspend its association agreement with the European Union, and instead favoring closer ties to Russia instead. At least that was the narrative that was presented. And initially the demonstrations were peaceful, but they turned into violent confrontations earlier in 2014, and eventually led to the 2014 February Maidan Massacre. Hundreds of people, including police officers and protesters, died. And this mass killing led to the ouster of Viktor Yanukovych, and significantly, you can say fatefully, altered Ukraine's political trajectory. And your research, if I may say, has been pivotal in analyzing these events. But, the focal point, of course, of your book is the Maidan massacres. But I think it's important for our listeners to understand the background of the events that led to that. And we don't have that much time, but would you be able to walk us through what was happening in the years and months leading up to the Maidan massacre and the toppling of Yanukovych? Is there any important context before 2013, for instance, in terms of Western intervention, in terms of influence and political changes in Ukraine?
So before Maidan started, Yanukovych promised Ukrainian people that he would pursue association and free trade agreement with the European Union. And there was a campaign by Yanukovych and his administration and Ukrainian government to kind of present this deal as very beneficial to Ukraine, and even as a membership, potential membership of Ukraine in the European Union. Even so, such deal did not include such provision because the European Union at the time refused to include such provision to even recognize possibility of Ukraine as potential member of European Union in the future. So there was no such kind of possibility included in this negotiation during negotiations to sign this agreement. But a lot of people actually in Ukraine believe that there was a real possibility, and they believe that Ukraine would join the European Union and would live then according to similar kind of standards of living as you have in Germany or France. So basically would become rich overnight without would travel freely and so on. So this was kind of a version of paradise, basically promised to Ukrainians. And then Yanukovych, after he actually read this deal, this negotiation kind of document, which was very long, I think 500 pages or more, which I skipped, kind of which I just checked myself, and saw this that actually this association and free trade agreement did not involve any possibility of European Union membership. But in addition to this, it actually was not very favorable to Ukraine, because it kind of included provisions that Ukraine would not be able to export a lot of agricultural products and other products like which were a key element of Ukrainian export, like steel and so on, to members of the European Union because of quota system, which prevented kind of possibility of such exports. And this was not very beneficial to Ukraine, but Ukraine agreed to basically to accept all imports from the European Union and all kind of other restrictions on industry and trade with Russia. So in this case, I think when Yanukovych made this decision to suspend agreement, signing of agreement between European Union and Ukraine of free trade and association in Vilnius, this was regarded as kind of basically as reneging on his promise, but also was rejected by opposition at the time, which was very kind of also kind of very public in supporting European Union integration of Ukraine. This was pro-Western opposition, but even so, and they presented this peace deal also as a real possibility of European Union membership for Ukraine. Even so, there was no such real possibility. But Yanukovych, in contrast to them, did not support NATO membership, but but Maidan parties at the time, pro-Western opposition, supported also NATO membership of Ukraine in addition to European Union membership. So then mass protests started in Kyiv against a decision by Yanukovych to suspend this signing of this association agreement, similar to what is now going on in Georgia, basically very similar situation. And there was immediate violence by police, dispersal of a small number of Maidan protesters on Maidan Square in Kyiv, Independence Square in Kyiv, but this was done not by, according to Yanukovych order, it was done actually specifically to inflame opposition to Yanukovych, because this dispersal was televised on television channels. It happened like 4 a.m. in the morning, but but I was watching this live because of time difference, and this was shown live basically, and then kind of broadcast on all television channels in Ukraine, specifically to show only violence by police against this small number of protesters on Maidan, but they did not show this video recording which were available of this far-right members of far-right sector on Maidan trying to attack police. So before the police started to beat remaining protesters and right sector members fled. So at the time there was involvement of far-right, and this escalated into mass protests afterwards, because people just believe this is like unjustifiable. They just saw one part of the story. They were not told everything. There was a mission of attack on police. So, and the same happened during Maidan protest, which lasted until February middle of February, until February 18, without any significant changes, because they were not able to achieve any significant changes in terms of resignation of Yanukovych. But this all changed with Maidan Massacre, which turned basically tide of the events, and also very important that at the time Maidan opposition parties were supported by Western countries, in particular by United States, And there was a visit by Victoria Nuland, who visited Kiev and met with Yanukovych, but also went to Maidan and gave like cookies or sandwiches to Maidan protesters to show support for opposition. And she also told Yanukovych basically not to use military, not to use force, police force, to kind of disperse Maidan. And the same message was given by Biden, because at the time Biden was vice president of the United States and he was responsible for U.S. policy towards Ukraine. So he was very active, telling Yanukovych not to use force to disperse Maidan protesters. And this all changed with Maidan Massacre on February 18, 20, which led to overthrow of Yanukovych government. This is a subject of my research.
And we definitely want to go into those events even more, because I think it's important. Particularly, I want to understand, the far right in Ukraine seem to be very critical to what happened in 2013 and to what is happening now. How significant of a factor are they in politics in general? And when did they start becoming a significant factor? Because, was this political force always present in Ukraine? And how did they get support? How did they get their funding and other forms of support? And from whom did they get those support from?
Actually, before Maidan started in 2015, far right was not very powerful in Ukraine, with the exception of Svoboda Party, which was received support of about 10% of popular support in elections before Maidan, but it was mostly based in Western Ukraine, in Galicia region of Western Ukraine, in also Volhynia region, which is my native region, also in Western Ukraine. But it had no support and no influence on the government, and it was at the time opposition, regarded as opposition, a kind of radical opposition to Yanukovych. And actually what happened is that even during Yanukovych presidency, there was effort basically by members of Yanukovych government to promote this far-right Svoboda Party by giving them kind of free advertisement on major television programs. So they were invited to major television programs and and they were even given money kind of by members of Yanukovych government, oligarchs close to Yanukovych, specifically because there was a plan by Yanukovych kind of to use this far-right Svoboda Party as a as opponent in elections, in presidential elections, because in parliamentary elections, because it was easier to beat them because they were too radical even for Ukrainians at the time. But this all changed with Maidan, because in the Maidan, far-right played a very important role. Even so, they still remain small in terms of numbers, like before. There were just few thousand members of far-right organizations in Ukraine at the time present on Maidan. But they were very active in violence from the start of Maidan, and also they were involved in Maidan Massacre. So they played a very important role in overthrow of Yanukovych during Maidan Massacre, and also they were very important during Maidan. So for this reason, after the Maidan, far-right became very powerful in Ukraine, much more powerful than their numbers would imply, and much more powerful than their electoral support would show, because they were involved in the violent overthrow of Yanukovych by means of Maidan Massacre, but also because they rely on violence. So this means, as I mentioned, even Zelensky was afraid of far-right, including Azov neo-Nazis, because they threatened him basically, and like right sector leader also threatened him to basically that he would be killed if he would sign peace agreements. So basically, Zelensky was afraid that of far-right. Even so, they are small. Again, they were able to get such outside influence in Ukraine, but contrary to claims by Russia that Ukraine is Nazi state to justify the invasion of Ukraine, Ukraine is not a Nazi state. So this is like just Russian propaganda. But there are real neo-Nazis like Azov movement, which is a movement, is a neo-Nazi movement, and they go back to even pre-Maidan kind of a political party, which is called Patriot of Ukraine and Social National Party of Ukraine. And I researched this far-right organizations even before Maidan. So this is another area of my research. So they are I think, most powerful in Europe, and not only in Europe, but also in the world, because of their reliance on violence and because they're able to overthrow Zelensky, as they did with Yanukovych. but not by themselves, but with involvement of other kind of political forces at the time.
Let me make a small digression. In the months that led up to the Maidan, in November 2013, the Armenian president, Serge Sargsyan, was also faced with a kind of an all-or-nothing choice by the EU with regard to the Eastern Partnership Association Agreement. However, in the end, Sargsyan managed to strike some kind of a balance, pursuing membership in the Eurasian Economic Union and maintaining ties with Brussels. Yanukovych, not so much. Why was it the case that these outcomes were so dramatically different in these two countries?
I think that Yanukovych was told by EU officials, including also by German Chancellor Angela Merkel, that there would be no possibility for for Ukraine to join or be associated with two economic unions, with one with Russia and another with the European Union at the same time. So basically, Yanukovych was told to make a choice, either with accept EU association agreement without any kind of possibility of of European Union membership at the time, because it was refused to be even promised by European Union members, and there was opposition in Germany and other countries at the time, but also because again, because this agreement also did not provide any support, economic support, and Russia offered actually Yanukovych government a loan, very important, I think $5 billion or something, loan to provide for economic support, and so Yanukovych accepted this loan from Russia, and so basically he said that he would orient his policy now towards Russia and considered joining Russia Economic Union, even so he did not say this officially or did not do this. So in this case, you can basically Yanukovych had not much choice in deciding this which course of his action, and he decided to suspend the agreement. He even did not cancel agreement. He just suspended the signing of this agreement because he said it necessary to negotiate a better deal for Ukraine.
It seems to me that at least in 2013, the president of Armenia, Serge Sargsyan, seemed to have found a pretty good balance, because I'm just wondering if the same kind of fate could have awaited Armenia at that time if Serge Sargsyan alienated the Russians. But I wonder if you have any additional thoughts on that. If you have researched specifically the agreement that was given to Armenia, was it the same as the European agreement? And also, was Russia, why didn't the EU give a similar kind of a deal for Russia?
I think this is, I'm not familiar with the agreement with the Armenia, but I think a very similar situation now is taking place in Georgia. So Georgia also suspended, but suspended this negotiation with the European Union, and actually Georgia was promised a membership of the European Union, and it was given even basically integration process started in the European Union. But I think the same issue is basically they are given a choice either to follow the European Union policies and guidelines, basically became lost their sovereignty, and or if they would try to maintain even neutrality, there is no real possibility of discussing any joining for Georgia to join Eurasian Economic Union or Customs Union led by Russia. So in this case, there was not such agreement, but even then, the European Union basically said that they would not support the current government of Georgia. They suspended themselves integration of Georgia in the European Union and negotiations between Georgia and the European Union. So in this case, I think very clear that this is just policy of European Union, and they use European Union membership as a as a tool, as a way to show that or motivate people and politicians in other countries and to receive public support without actually any real possibility. Because I think that if government of Ukraine would change and Zelensky would be replaced by some other politician and other government which will be neutral, like similar to Georgia, it's very likely that European Union membership would be over for Ukraine. There would be even no real possibility, and this is also concerned NATO membership. And in terms of Russia, again, Russia did not kind of consider joining European Union, and so in this case there was no such agreement between the European Union. There was no also association and free trade agreement with Russia, because Russia did not negotiate this. They kind of even so they were major. The European Union was major trading partner with Russia. So Russia preferred to deal with separate countries. So it was very active in supplying natural gas to Germany, to many other Western European countries, and using natural gas and oil as a leverage in terms of political influence. So they did not want to have any kind of association with the European Union, because this would limit power of Russia, kind of their sovereignty. So they continue their policy and remain autonomous.
Yeah.
I want to ask you almost like a yes or no or a point blank question. In your view, was the Maidan movement a coup sponsored by Western powers or external powers?
Again, this is also part of my research. So I can say, based on my research, Maidan represented combination of mass protest, which was supported by many people, especially in Western Ukraine, but not in Eastern and Southern Ukraine, but a lot of people in Western Ukraine, or most people in Western Ukraine and Central Ukraine supported Maidan, and also participated in mass protest. But also Maidan was also a color revolution, similar to other color revolutions which took place in other countries, like including in Ukraine in 2004, Orange Revolution, and other revolutions, so-called color revolutions. And in addition to this, Maidan also was a coup, because Yanukovych was overthrown not by popular protest. Popular protest did not change this. His government did not replace his government. Yanukovych was overthrown as a result of Maidan Massacre, because he was falsely blamed for this Maidan Massacre, and he also faced assassination attempts during this Maidan Massacre. So these two events were very crucial, and he was overthrown by a small number of people, including again led by kind of Maidan opposition, which included oligarchic elements and also far-right elements of Maidan opposition, and some members of his own government and parliament who switched sides. And also, in addition to this, Maidan was United States-led regime change, because this was a policy of regime change led by the United States in Ukraine, and this was openly stated by many kind of government officials, including President Obama. He stated in his interview that the United States played I think help in the transition of government in Ukraine after Yanukovych. Basically, when actually Yanukovych was still president after Maidan Massacre. So basically, this means the United States was involved in this violent overthrow of Ukrainian government in terms of supporting this overthrow as a part of a regime change policy.
Well, actually, what's interesting, and for our listeners, I want to bring back the context. The Maidan protest started November 2013. Then we had violent clashes in January 2014 and the massacre in February. So I want to understand, what is the mainstream narrative in Western media today about the Maidan massacre? And what evidence from your research challenges that massacre? What should people learn from reading your book that will be dramatically different than what they would get by reading conventional news or other books?
So again, mainstream narrative presented by major Western media, by Western politicians and Western governments, and by Zelensky government and by Poroshenko government and by Ukrainian media, with just a few, a very small number of exceptions, is that this massacre was conducted by government snipers or members of police unit called Berkut, anti-riot police unit, and that they were basically responsible for massacre or mass murder of peaceful Maidan protesters who had no weapons whatsoever, and they basically, these protesters were executed basically with on live television basically, and filmed, and this execution was filmed by members of government forces, and this was done on order of Viktor Yanukovych and his senior members of his government, including Minister of Internal Affairs and head of State Security Service of Ukraine. So this is like narrative which is still continues, kind of and almost kind of regarded as a matter of faith. But there is no evidence whatsoever to support this. And this is, I think, very important and very kind of striking for me, because I researched all the evidence about Maidan massacre for more than 10 years. I was watching this live. And then I look into all publicly available evidence, including the Maidan massacre trial, which was taking place since 2015 in Ukraine and issued a recently verdict. So looking all this evidence, I examined like thousands of videos, about almost 1,000 hours of Maidan massacre trial broadcasts on YouTube. I look into all witness testimonies, all evidence from forensic examinations by government experts, which were presented as a Maidan massacre trial. So I did all this examination, and evidence is clear beyond any doubt. I can say that all the evidence shows that this massacre was not conducted by orders of Yanukovych. There was no such order. And recently, even Maidan massacre trial verdict stated this. There was no evidence of such order by Yanukovych or his members of his government to massacre Maidan protesters. So this is like official court decision, again, which is never reported by any media. So this is like total silence about this. Even so, I posted this as text. I have this text of this verdict, which is official court decision. So in addition to this, all evidence shows that Maidan protesters were massacred not by police or by government snipers, but they were shot by snipers who were located in Maidan control buildings and areas, specifically Hotel Ukraine and Music Conservatory and other areas. And the same snipers shot not only Maidan protesters, they also shot police. So they killed and killed 4 policemen during this massacre and wounded many more. And this is the reason why police fled from the Maidan itself, and later Maidan protesters moved after the police, and they were shot not by Berkut police, whose members were retreating to barricades, but actually they were shot by snipers who were shooting Maidan protesters in the back and from the side and from very top directions. This is confirmed by testimonies of several hundred witnesses. And including testimonies of absolute majority of wounded Maidan protesters testified at the Maidan massacre trial investigations that were shot by snipers located in Hotel Ukraine and other buildings which are controlled by Maidan opposition and not by police or by government forces. There were also videos which show snipers in Hotel Ukraine and other locations, and these snipers were Maidan snipers, specifically from far-right link group of Maidan snipers who were based in Music Conservatory and then in Hotel Ukraine. There are such videos. There are videos of snipers shooting from Hotel Ukraine, like BBC video, shooting into BBC television crew, and other videos show that the snipers in Hotel Ukraine are shooting Maidan protesters. So there are such videos, not only testimonies, but also videos. There are also audio recordings also about this. And even also forensic examinations by government experts, medical experts, shows that the Maidan protesters were shot, as I mentioned, in the back and from the side and from very top to bottom direction, and not from the ground level in front of them, which was location of the Berkut police. And government snipers, according to all the videos and according to even government and even to Maidan massacre trial verdict, arrived to Maidan only after Maidan massacre was almost over. And after they arrived to government control locations, there was basically shooting almost stopped. So this is just show they even did not fire shots, and so they were not responsible for the massacre.
So we read, and I admit I'm a little bit ignorant on this, but the term Georgian snipers, came to my attention when I was reading this. What was the role of Georgian snipers in the Maidan massacre? What were they doing in Ukraine at that time? And there's also some linkage to Mikheil Saakashvili. So what can you tell us about that?
Yes, in addition to evidence which I mentioned, there are also public admissions by 14 members of Maidan sniper groups who said that they were members of such sniper groups. So, and this included 7 Georgians who identified themselves by name, with one, I think, with one exception, person who did not say his name or his identity, but all other stated publicly in various documentaries, in U.S. documentary, in Italian documentary, in Macedonian television interviews, and in Israeli documentary and even in testimony to Maidan Massacre trial and investigation, they stated that they actually were Georgians. They provided their identities, they provided their passport numbers, all the details, like they showed that they visited Ukraine. So this is basically, and they stated that they were ones who were members of some groups of Maidan snipers who were actually located in Hotel Ukraina and Music Conservatory, and they received orders from Maidan opposition leaders and also from members of Saakashvili government, former Saakashvili government, members in Ukraine, to shoot both Maidan protesters and police, specifically to create such kind of violence. And they said that they witnessed such shooting of police and protesters by the snipers, and they named such snipers who were also identified in my study, who were members of this far-right organization, which is, again, who also, some of members of this group also admitted publicly in BBC interview and other Ukrainian media interviews that they shot police. So this is also confirmed by their admissions.
Has this element, the effectively foreign intervention or foreign cooperation, the Georgian snipers ordered by Mikheil Saakashvili allegedly, was this evidence part of the court trials, or was this part of the official investigation in the Maidan massacres?
This is, I think, a very important issue, because this is, again, never reported by any major media, because all basically media in Ukraine and even Security General Office stated that this is not real people, that after these Georgians stated in Italian television interviews that they were snipers and the members of such Maidan sniper groups and so on, which I mentioned. So immediately Ukrainian media and government officials and Security General Office stated this is not real people, they are actors, basically they just act, they are not kind of the ones who they claim to be. So actually, and this is information I think very crucial, because these Georgians agreed to provide testimony to Maidan Massacre trial and to Prosecutor General Office investigation. But Prosecutor General Office investigation refused to interview them, and there was a request by lawyers of Berkut members to interview for testimony of these Georgian snipers via video link. And they initially gave their interviews in Armenia. They said that they were based in Armenia, and they wanted to testify from Armenia. And this is what a court decision issued says that they can testify via video link from Armenia, but they had to do this via official government of Armenia, basically via official channels. So this took a lot of time before, like, Ministry of Justice of Ukraine contacted their counterparts in Armenia, and so they needed to find these Georgians and so on to arrange testimony via video link. And when this happened, actually, this took just 2 years and so on. And then, because this was just specifically delayed by Ukrainian government, so afterwards there was a response from Armenian government to Ukrainian court, to Ukrainian Ministry of Justice and to Ukrainian court, that they were no longer, that these Georgians who were in Armenia, they are no longer in Armenia. But I think this is very important, because this means that Armenian government officially confirms that this are actually real people. Their names are real, their documents are real. So because this is the ones who they were in Armenia. So this means this was very important confirmation. They are not actors. They are not just pretending to be to say this. They actually were real people who gave their real identity, real passport documents, and so on. And then the same Georgians said that they wanted to testify from Belarus, and only after intervention of Berkut lawyers, Prosecutor General Office of Ukraine agreed to to have their testimony done in Belarus. Again, Prosecutor General Office of Belarus for Ukrainian government investigation. This was before Russian invasion, before war with Russia. And then these Georgians gave such official testimonies via video link. For Ukrainian, not a video link, but a video recording for Ukrainian investigation by Prosecutor General Office of Maidan Massacre of the police. So, and only one of these testimonies was was accepted by video testimonies was accepted by Maidan Massacre trial judge and jury, and it was officially admitted for Maidan Massacre trial. as evidence, and this testimony was presented. So this is like shows again that their identity was confirmed even by Maidan Massacre trial and official records in Ukraine, and bodyguards of Ukraine said that there was such people who visited Ukraine. So this is like real identity of this person who's a Georgian sniper, kind of self-identified sniper, that he was a real person with a real name and that he visited Ukraine before Maidan massacre. And this is so their testimonies were officially admitted, but again, there were no media reports, total silence in the Ukraine and in the West.
Was that Armenian response also in 2014?
No, I think this took place, I think something like 2017 or maybe 2018. I think, or even, yeah, I think around 2018, because there was Italian documentary, so even this maybe even later, maybe even 2019.
Professor, you initially released your book electronically and available for all to read on the internet. The hardcover was later published by Palgrave Macmillan. What motivated you to give free and complete access to the electronic version of your book? Did you encounter problems in publishing a book with findings that challenge the mainstream narrative?
Well, this is actually, there are two editions. One is a hardcover edition and electronic edition of this book, which is free for anybody to read and download. They are both published by Palgrave Macmillan, which is British academic press. So this is the same book, but published by the same publisher, but its electronic edition is open access, or basically free for anybody to read and to download or to view on the website of this publisher. And this book is now has more than 200,000 views and downloads already, and it's individual chapters. So this is became, I think, one of the most popular books already just published by this major Western academic press. And I have to do GoFundMe campaign to try to collect kind of crowdfunding to support to pay for making this book open access, because it costs money. So it costs something about, I think, like $15,000. So I collected already almost 40% of money to pay for this open access fee to the publisher. So I still collecting this kind of crowdfunding, which is public information, is also available and linked in my webpage and on my social media. So in this case, I think I think this was very important to make this book open access, because of when publisher accepted my book, this was standard process, peer review. So it went via peer review. I already published 3 peer-reviewed articles in peer-reviewed journals before about Maidan Massacre. So this was based on my research, and my book was peer-reviewed, and it was published afterwards with, I think, in very, very professional and very academic manner, because this is a major academic press. So I do not have any problems with publishing my book Maidan Massacre. Even so, before this, there were issues with, again, publishing my peer-reviewed journal articles when I tried to do this. So this is, I think, very important evidence that, and this is, I think, a very important fact that this book was published, because now I had another book which was supposed to be published even earlier. I submitted my manuscript almost 1 year ago, which was about war in Ukraine. This book was called From the Maidan to the Russia-Ukraine War, in which I examine everything from what I discussed in case of war in Ukraine, Russian invasion, war in Donbass, Crimea annexation, and other issues, and Maidan Massacre, and so on, and how this led to escalation and finally to Russian invasion of Ukraine. So this book was also accepted after very positive peer reviews by another major British publisher, Routledge, which is academic press. They accepted this, and it was supposed to be published again without any changes, because this was not peer reviewers recommended no significant changes. So it was supposed to be published last summer. I also as open access, because I received support. In support of my crowdfunding for this book was there was involvement of Elon Musk and David Sachs, who just was nominated by Donald Trump to become head of scientific council of scientific advisors and advisor to Donald Trump, and basically a person in charge of artificial intelligence and cryptocurrency. And also like prominent American journalists like Glenn Greenwald and other very important, like famous scholars and so on, supported, and journalists supported my publication and open access publication of my book. So, but Rupish then refused to publish my book. So now they I have no choice but to cancel contract because they refused to publish my book because they were not satisfied with content of the book. They said I need to present all the different sides of arguments. Basically, they specifically said that I need to present my book that Russia was involved in Nord Stream bombing and so on. So basically, I cannot commit such fraud, academic fraud, because there is no evidence of this. This is not just there is nothing to do with Russia because I present what I see as a kind of evidence. So I just that's why I refuse to change my book, revise my book. Even so, I did 2 revisions of the book, but again, they said this is not sufficient. I have to use alternative sources and so on, and use alternative perspectives, which for me this is not acceptable. So I now would have to find another publisher and publish this book. So this is like just illustration that publishing such books is now not easy. And I was very grateful for this. For Paul Gray Macmillan for publishing my book about Maidan Massacre, because this is also became now a very popular book, and also thankful for everybody who contributed to making this possible for this ongoing campaign for via GoFundMe and PayPal to fund this open access publication.
Yeah, we'll definitely link to your GoFundMe and PayPal.
If I can briefly say, this is why I made this public, because I did not originally wanted to make it kind of open access book about Maidan Massacre, but because when I saw the price of my book would be almost $200 American, like hardcover edition would cost $200. So in this case, this would mean that basically people would not be able to buy the book. So I decided to make it more accessible, and now this became a very popular book. So 200,000 views already, more than 200,000 views and downloads of this book already. And if it was not publicly, if it was just published on the original term, on the original contract, so it would be just bought maybe by a few hundred people, because it would be so expensive. It's like typically, so this is very typical for academic publications, because they just bought by libraries by very few people, scholars, and so they are not intended to be read by many people. But this is why I'm quite surprised and pleased that there's such a great interest in my publication of my book.
Very good. Let me just mention for our listeners, the Maidan Massacre in Ukraine came out in 2024. We will have a link to this book in our show notes, podcast.groong.org/episode number. And I hope that you click on the link and find the book.
Professor Katchanovski, let's move on and try to finish as we close the show. We wanted to ask you about our region. You mentioned Georgia a few times during this discussion. We're seeing mass protests in Georgia, and again, the focus of the unrest is partnership with the EU. Essentially, either you go with the West or you're the enemy. So it is a very polarizing issue, and that polarization, in my opinion, seems to be coming from the West in this case. But it's almost a deja vu, because on social media we see representatives of the Georgian opposition handing out cookies during the protests. Do you believe that the fervor with which the West is pushing the Georgian opposition could lead to Maidanization of the situation in Georgia? What is your assessment?
I think I already mentioned in my interview to Nation magazine, which is major US magazine, that this is basically similar to what we had in Maidan. So this is Georgia events are very similar to what I saw in Maidan, with the exception of violence, deadly violence, which took place during Maidan Massacre, and also other kind of cases of violence which took place which was deadly. But similar protests became now violent in Georgia as well, and so there are a lot of similarities in the violence, and also media coverage and Western involvement of Western countries, publicly supporting such overthrow, basically, or replacement, or kind of regime change of democratically elected government. Even so, this is not a like pure democracy, not kind of, there are obviously issues in the Georgian elections, but I saw no evidence to say that kind of Georgia elections were falsified, or that the government again want to join Russia. This is like Russian government. There is no such evidence.
And coming to Armenia, under Nikol Pashinyan, Armenia is currently attempting a geopolitical pivot westward, aligning itself with Western powers, namely the United States and France, while trying to move away from the traditional Russian alliance. As a political scientist, can you give any advice to Armenians? And what is your assessment of the situation in Armenia?
I think Armenia is in similar situation between kind of West and Russia. And so it kind of is now pressured basically by West to join the Western-led kind of alliance. And in such case, also there are promises of, I think, European integration and so on, and support from the West. But I think in Georgia, people recognize, and I think politicians recognize that Western countries basically use kind of post-Soviet countries like Georgia or Ukraine for their own purposes, just for geopolitical reasons. They are not interested much in people. So in this case, I think very important, as the Georgian government did this and the Ukrainian government failed to do this, is not to kind of believe these promises and just actually know actually what's going on in terms of politics and geopolitics, because in this case, I think it's very clear that there is a Western interest basically just to use countries against Russia. And I think Russia also kind of want to kind of establish their influence in the former Soviet countries. So in this case, I think just to be kind of trying to kind of avoid this fate would be, I think, very important for people in Armenia and many other countries like Moldova faces a very similar situation as well.
All right, let's leave it there for today. This was a very interesting conversation. Thank you so much, Professor Katchanovski, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's our show today. This episode was recorded on December 7th, 2024. We've been talking to Dr. Ivan Katchanovski, who teaches at the School of Political Studies at the University of Ottawa. His research focuses on democratization, comparative politics, political communication, and conflicts, in particular in Ukraine. For more information on Dr. Katchanovski and everyone else in this show, I guess that would be you and me, Hovig, check our show notes at podcast.groong.org/episode number. I'm Asbed Bedrosian.
And I'm Hovik Manucharyan.
Please find us on social media and follow us everywhere you get your Armenian news. The links are going to be in the show notes.